this whole workshop, and I guess I skipped all the stuff about mowing and irrigation. So recording in progress now. Sorry about that. Okay. I'm just checking here to see if there was any questions. Okay. Don't see any questions yet, but I see lots of Woodbury in the house. So hello, Woodbury. And one Hugo.
Okay, so this is my first slide. Cool season turf grasses growth cycle. Angie showed similar to this. Those of you that have lawn, this is no surprise to you. May, June timeframe, grass grows a lot. We get this time of year, July and August, it really slows down, especially a year like this when we have near drought and really hot weather. So the grass doesn't grow much at all. And then again in the fall, September, October timeframe, it again grows a lot. And you can see, as she mentioned, the height of the blades is comparable to the depth of the roots. So it's really important to understand this when it comes time to water and fertilize and so on. So the timing is everything. Because of that, when it's growing is when you need to feed it, and we'll talk more about that. What's happening here? Best time to fertilize, early August through mid-October. Typical lawn only needs one fertilization. They've done research at the University of Minnesota, and that's the best time. Again, you can see from the graph there, that fall time frame, September, October is when the grass is really growing. What's happening at that point is the grass is putting all that carbohydrate energy into the roots, building up energy for next year. So one time is the best to fertilize. Second best would be in the springtime. Again, it coincides with that growth spurt, May through June. Not so much June this year because it was so hot, but typically, that varies. We know Minnesota weather, but when it's in that growth spurt, does absolutely no good fertilize here in July. Grass is not growing. If you think of fertilizer as food, grass doesn't need food. So it's like almost dormant. It's almost like, use a human analogy, it's like feeding somebody when they're sleeping. Just, it does no good. And that leads to problems because if the grass can't consume or take up those nutrients, then there's more chance of runoff. So timing is really critical. Just some bullets here in general on lawn fertilizer. Lawn will be thicker with fertilizer application. So by all means, one application, perhaps two, is a good thing. It's going to make a thicker lawn. A thicker lawn is going to be more resilient, both to foot traffic as well as minimize weed growth, because the thicker the lawn is, the less bare soil is exposed and less chance of weeds to germinate. We all know that weed seeds are virtually everywhere, so thicker lawn is one way to combat that. Most likely nutrient that your lawn is going to need is nitrogen. When it comes to a bag or a container of fertilizer, it's going to be the first number. There's 3 numbers on a bag. And the first one is nitrogen. That's most likely. It's the most volatile, most transient in the soil, so it goes away the quickest. As well, the plants use it up quickly. The second number is phosphorus. I believe it's the law in Minnesota that you cannot have, retailers cannot sell lawn fertilizer with phosphorus in it. So no middle number. You can buy fertilizer with phosphorus for perhaps vegetable gardens or flower gardens, but not for lawns. And the reason for that is our soils in general in Minnesota have lots of phosphorus in them. And phosphorus, Angie didn't touch on it, but phosphorus is often the limiting nutrient in water bodies. So as soon as more phosphorus goes into a lake or a stream, that's food for algae growth. So we want to minimize that. Third number on a bag of fertilizer is potassium, also critical for plants, but typically the soil has enough, so the lawn doesn't need supplement. So really the one thing you're going to put on your lawn is nitrogen fertilizer. So large first number. A typical lawn fertilizer might be something like 3303 comes to mind. So lots of nitrogen, very little phosphorus, no phosphorus and very little potassium. You need less nitrogen or fertilizer if you leave your clippings. Again, the research shows those clippings have lots of nitrogen in them, as well as phosphorus. The lawn doesn't need the phosphorus so much, but those clippings that end up in the storm drain go down the storm drain and end up in our lakes and ponds. And again, that's going to feed the algae. So we want to avoid that. It's a good thing leaving them on your lawn because they're essentially free fertilizer. They do break down. The one time they don't break down is if you use that last bullet. Too much nitrogen causes a thick thatch layer. Typically, you don't need to dethatch a lawn. It's only when you've fertilized excessively with nitrogen such that you get so much top growth that it's growing faster than it can break down. But a typical healthy lawn, you mow the lawn, leave those clippings on there, and they're going to break down over time. Let's talk about natural versus synthetic fertilizers. Sometimes natural fertilizers are referred to as organic. The federal government does not regulate fertilizers, so it's not organic certified like food would be. So natural is probably a better term for it. Sources for natural fertilizer are manure, compost, grass clippings, some name brands there is Milorganite, which is human waste from a Milwaukee sewage system turned into fertilizer. Ringer, not sure the source of that one. I think Sustain is turkey manure. So it's going to be a natural waste product, either plant material or animal or bird waste. Natural fertilizers are typically lower nutrient content. I mentioned that example earlier of 3303. A natural or organic fertilizer is going to be much less than that. It might be in the single digits for nitrogen. Because of that, it's a higher cost. They must break down to release those nutrients. When we say organic fertilizer, that means that organic, the definition of that means that it's bound with carbon. So it's in a plant form or animal waste form. It has to break down into the soil before those nutrients become available to a plant. Because of that, it makes it slow release. Tends to be a good thing. You don't have to fertilize as often. Because it's slow release, it's not likely at all to burn your lawn if you put too much on or don't water it in. Because it's a natural fertilizer, the application rates can be difficult to calculate. Not going to be as consistent as a synthetic fertilizer. And oftentimes they may contain some weed seeds or pathogens, some diseases. So those are kind of trade-offs that aren't desirable. As far as synthetic or manufactured fertilizers, they're going to include ammonium nitrate, urea, IBDU, sulfur-coated urea, urea formaldehyde, uniform concentration. So because they're manufacturing it, it's going to be very consistent. So again, back to that example, 33 is 33% by weight of the fertilizer. It's going to be very consistent, 33, whereas a more natural fertilizer can vary a lot. Because of that, it's low cost. You might say the downside to synthetic fertilizer is that it takes a fair amount of energy. Our atmosphere, our air on planet Earth here is like 80% nitrogen. So nitrogen is plentiful. It just takes energy to take it out of the air, put it into a form of fertilizer that we can use it. Some of those fertilizers are then coated so that they become slow release. Put a sulfur coating on them, and what that does is it requires the soil bacteria to work on that, and over time then it's going to be slow release. Again, that's a good thing for the homeowner because you fertilize less often and you get a longer longer growth cycle on that fertilizer application. As I mentioned, fewer applications are required then. Urea formaldehydes and IBDUs are examples of that. Some rapidly converting available nutrients, ammonium nitrate and urea, those are going to be really quick. Put them on your lawn and immediately you're going to see, within days, you're going to see quick green of that lawn, which isn't all bad, but because they're quick, then they don't last that long. Because they're quick and concentrated, you run the risk of burning your lawn, particularly if you spill some or put too much on, don't water it in properly. You also run the risk of any excess leaching out, get a heavy rainfall after you've applied fertilizer, can run off, can be problems. And because it doesn't, because it's quick, you might need multiple applications. So instead of just that one time in the fall, you might do it twice in the fall, like a September and then again October timeframe. So kind of some trade-offs there, some benefits, some drawbacks. So how much fertilizer do you need? Well, that depends on a number of things. I've listed 3 of them there. The soil would make a difference. Depending on how black or rich your soil is, or how much organic matter is in there, how much compost, all of that blackness of soil, that's all plant material that's breaking down. So it's providing some nutrients. It also helps hold the water, helps hold the fertilizer, make it available to the plant. So good soil is going to make a difference. Really, the only way you know what you have for soil is to do a soil test. There's information on that on the University Extension website. I'll give you that later if you don't know it. You take a sample, 3 or 4 different spots around the yard, maybe 4 or 5 inches deep, mix them together. So you might have, I don't know, a couple cups of soil that you've mixed together so that you don't have just one specific spot where you might have had some road salt, or if you've got a dog, you might have dog waste in that particular spot. So you want to mix it up so you don't have just one small spot tested. Send that into the university. I think it's a small charge of, I think it's $17. They'll send you out a report, advise how much fertilizer you need, how much organic matter in the soil, how to amend that soil, make it a better soil, and so on and so forth. It's well worth it at least one time to know what you have for soil. How often you water makes a difference. Angie talked earlier about 1 inch of rain a week, and it looked like from those stats, most lawns are irrigated. The more you irrigate, you're going to have to fertilize more. So if you fertilize less, if you just count on the rain for your moisture, you're going to have less fertilizer needs. And then if you leave those clippings, we've talked about that, because there are nutrients in those clippings, you leave them on. So ideal would be know that you've got good soil, so amend the soil. Obviously, that's not something you can do very well after the fact, but if you're moving into a new home with no lawn yet, you can certainly put down a good layer of rich humus soil rather than that hard pan that oftentimes the builders leave. Water less often. Inch of water a week is plenty. Most lawns will survive with less than that, just relying on rain for the most part. This year is a bit of an exception because it has been so hot and so dry. And then leave those clippings. And again, reiterating the point Angie made earlier, you don't want to let the grass grow 4 or 5 inches long and then mow it down to 2. 1/3 of the blade is the most you want to cut off. If you've been away for a number of weeks and the grass does get too long, particularly in that September or May, June timeframe, you'll want to mow it twice, maybe a day or 2 apart. So take off 1/3 off the top. So let's say it grows to 5 inches, you might take 1 inch off, come back a day or 2 later and take another inch off to get it down to that 3-inch level. That helps make shorter clippings, and it helps the lawn, those plants recover from that mowing. That's always stressful on a lawn when you mow it. Doesn't show it well, but when you cut half or more of those blades off, it is stressful for the lawn. So a good rule of thumb for a starting point is a pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So 1,000 square feet would be what would that be, 20 by 50 area? So maybe a typical front yard, I don't know. And 1,000 pounds, the way fertilizer is, so that, again, back to my example of 3303, it's 33% of nitrogen by weight. So if you've got a 10-pound bag, it's going to have 3.3 pounds of nitrogen in there. It's 33%. That's the number on the first number of the three. If it was a 6 for the first number, then it would be a lot more pounds of fertilizer, obviously adding to the cost. But that would be a good starting point. If you don't water too much, you leave your clippings and you have normal or halfway decent soil. Let's talk about eco-friendly fertilizers. Along with your registration, we had some questions as to what areas of interest, and this one I think was the top one of interest. It's kind of an oxymoron because eco-friendly fertilizers, fertilizer is fertilizer. They're essentially the same, whether they're natural, organic, or synthetic, slow release, fast release, whatever. It's still the same nutrients. Nitrogen is nitrogen, phosphorus is phosphorus. All fertilizers have those nutrients in them, so it's important that they be not misplaced or improperly spread. That's what makes them not eco-friendly. So to be eco-friendly, it needs to be properly applied. So where does it go? Obviously, answer is on the lawn, not on the streets and driveways. Not so easy to do. Oftentimes we'll use a broadcast spreader and some of it flies off onto the sidewalk, onto the street, onto the driveway. That's pretty normal. However, when that happens, get a leaf blower or a broom, sweep it back onto the lawn. Really important. It's the law in Minnesota. When to apply it? We've talked about that. We showed the graph, the two growth humps, May timeframe and that September, October timeframe. Apply it when the lawn can benefit. So again, if you're going to do one application, September, October is the ideal time. It's the most benefit to the lawn. We talked about that, storing those carbohydrates for next year's growth. If you need a second application, maybe because you've got poor soil or maybe because you've used a fast-acting fertilizer, then again, May and June would be time for a second application. The amount, only as much as needed per your soil test would be ideal. I think it was the previous slide I suggested, what was it, 100 pounds per 1,000? I don't even remember now, let me go back. 1 pound per 1,000 square feet, so that's a good starting point. And then what type of fertilizer, natural or synthetic, does not really matter in terms of the grass. Again, that pound per 1,000 square feet, it's going to be a lot more fertilizer, a lot more bags, pounds of fertilizer if you're using a natural fertilizer that's maybe 6% nitrogen versus a synthetic one that's 33% nitrogen. So just simple math on that, 6 compared to 33 is like 5 times as much. So with the synthetic, you'd use 1/5 or so less as much fertilizer as you would if it was an organic fertilizer. Let's change gears here and let's talk about weed management. I think that was number 2 on our polls of areas of interest. Hand weeding is always an option. It really only applies to small areas or small lawns. Again, depending on how much time you have and how many weeds you might have. But it certainly is the most environmentally friendly. You're not using any pesticides, so it's a good option if you have small areas. Oftentimes, weeds are biggest problems along driveways or sidewalks, so it's not out of the question that you could manage it by hand pulling those weeds. Herbicides can be effective, are effective. Always, can't stress that enough. Always follow the label. Just a little soapbox there. I think we have so many warnings and caution labels with new products nowadays that we tend to be overwhelmed by them and ignore them. But in the case of food and fertilizer, in this case, it is the law. It has It has to tell you how to use that product, how much. That bullet there in yellow, need to identify the weeds. It has to say on that bag of fertilizer, it's or herbicide. It has to say that it is effective against dandelions. It has to say that it's effective against thistle. It has to say that it's effective against crabgrass and so on. If it doesn't say it on there, it doesn't do any good to put it on your lawn. If you've got a problem with crabgrass and it's not listed as a weed that herbicide is going to kill, you're wasting your money. So you need to really know what that weed is. And most of my next slides, I'm going to go through some common lawn weeds to help us identify those. So back to the always follow the label. The wrong herbicide can be damaging and even kill your lawn. So you don't want to take that risk either. It's not common, but it can happen. There's basically two types of herbicide that we're going to talk about. Pre-emergence, that's before you see them. So it'd be annual weeds. Before they've germinated and you can see those little green leaves is when you apply that. Very effective, particularly crabgrass. And then post-emergence, so you can see them. The dandelion is already there. The creeping Charlie is already there. You're going to want a post-emergence herbicide in that case. And again, timing is critical. We'll talk more about that. Enough said at this point. We'll get to that. So pre-emergence, so particularly crabgrass, which is an annual grass. That's good and that's bad. That is annual. It's kind of nice knowing that it's an annual come that September, October timeframe. One good frost and it kills the crabgrass. The downside to crabgrass being an annual is it has lots of seeds. So by the time it's killed by that frost in October, it's already dropped probably thousands of seeds. So that seed bank is going to be there next spring when it comes time to germinate. Unlike the lawn commercials, fertilizer, weed control commercials, we start hearing them about March. Apply that weed preventer this weekend, get it down. No, you can't do that. It can be too early. I don't recall right offhand, but there's a certain temperature that those pre-emergent herbicides are most effective, and it's typically mid-April to mid-May. So second half of April into early mid-May. Applying it in early April or even late March is going to do no good. You're wasting your time. And again, likewise, past mid-May, those crabgrass weeds have already germinated. A pre-emergence is not going to kill them at that point. You would have to treat them with a post-emergence after they've already come up and you can see them. So really important to know that timing on that. Post-emergence, most broadleaf control is going to be post-emergence. We'll again talk about some of those. The dandelions is the one that comes to mind. Most common in lawns that most people would just as soon not have in their lawn. And the September through late October is the best time to apply that. That's not when they're typically bright yellow flowers. It's typically in the spring that they're those bright yellow flowers. But dandelions in particular are a perennial. Thistle is a perennial, so it lives from one year to the next. That's what perennial means. The most effective time is in the fall. It's that September timeframe is when those plants are taking those herbicides into the plant material and down into the root, and that's going to kill those weeds most effectively. Second best time would be in that May, June timeframe when they're actively growing. This time of year, July, especially this year, wasting your money. That's not to say you don't see lawn services out. Probably saw some out today, yesterday, tomorrow. This is not the time to be putting on herbicide because those lawns, for the most part, are not actively growing. Those weeds are not actively growing at this time. So here are some examples. I think everybody's familiar with this one. Dandelion, post-emergence herbicide is going to be most effective. So just like this, when you can see them, this photo is probably in that May, June timeframe. Again, fall would be the best, but May or June works. Plantain, broadleaf plantain, another common one that you might see in the lawn. Big round green leaves, seed head on them. So again, post-emergence. Thistle, a couple different ones shown here. Canada thistle, and then I forget what the other one is on the right there, a thorny thistle or something. But again, a perennial weed. Not as common in the lawn, but we do see some from time to time. Round ivy, creeping Charlie. Most of us are familiar with that. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it does have the purple flowers. It does have kind of a stinky smell to it. Post-emergent herbicide is going to be most effective. Creeping Charlie is in the mint family, so it spreads, as we all know, tenaciously, and it's tough to kill. So herbicide you're going to use on that must contain this triclopyr. If it doesn't do that, it's 2,4-D is a common herbicide for dandelions and plantain and so on, very effective, but it's not very effective against Creeping Charlie. It'll burn the leaves and kind of stunt it, but more often than not, Creeping Charlie will come back. So that triclopyr is really important. White clover, again, post-emergence. This one, philosophically, this is a tough one because clover is very good for the pollinators, and it's great for the lawn because it does take nitrogen out of the air, fixes nitrogen, and puts it into the soil. So it is a great plant to have in your lawn. But some people find the little white flowers objectionable, and I guess that's their choice. Black medic, another one. It kind of looks like clover, but it's got little yellow flowers instead of white ones. Again, post-emergent works well. Pre-emergent can also work on black medic. Bird's foot trefoil. I by no means know all these weeds. I went through the university website and put these photos together. So I'm guessing most people recognize them when they see a photo. This little green thing with the little yellow flowers. It's bird's foot trefoil, but how many know the names of these? And for heaven's sakes, how many know the Latin or scientific name for them? But they're there if you need them. But again, post-emergence is important. Wood sorrel. This one is really common, also called oxalis. Kind of looks like clover, but it's got a heart-shaped leaf. Very common in the lawn. Prostrate knotweed, excuse me. Little tough one, really tough stems, small leaves. Again, grows in compacted, poor soil. Typically find it along the edge of a driveway or sidewalk, or maybe a high traffic area. Again, one that we want to get out, and a pre-emergence or post-emergence are effective on that. It's another common one you might see. Prostrate spurge, little reddish stems with small leaves, one central root right there in the center. Again, one that we don't want in our lawns necessarily. Common purslane, more of a succulent. Again, I'm guessing that most of you recognize this one by sight, but maybe don't know the name of it. Common chickweed, little leaf, kind of a tender plant, but quite difficult to pull out because as you give it a tug on those stems, it oftentimes will break off at the root. So again, a post-emergent herbicide is effective. A couple more here. Mouse ear chickweed. Again, another one that's, it's green. It's not the worst thing in your lawn, but it does spread with time, so you can treat it. And then crabgrass. This one is an annual. It's a tough one. In particular, this hot weather we've been having, crabgrass loves the hot weather. It seems to survive in drought conditions, so it really does grow a lot in that down curve on the growth for Kentucky bluegrass, that July, August time frame. Crabgrass loves that kind of weather, so it can really take hold. A couple different ones there. Large crabgrass, that's on the left, and then on the right is a smooth crabgrass. Look very similar. The smooth crabgrass got a little bit of a red tinge to it, but I'm guessing most of you recognize these by sight. And pre-emergent is most effective way to manage crabgrass, but again, you've got to get that treatment down in late April, early May time frame. You can do a post-emergence, but it's not. I have found it's not nearly as effective. And then quackgrass, not the worst thing. It again is a perennial, so it's there. It looks a lot like Kentucky bluegrass, but it's got a wider blade. It spreads by rhizomes those roots underneath, and it can be undesirable if you're looking for a perfect lawn. So tough to get rid of, but it can be. So a quick summary, weed management summary. Really important to identify the weed. Again, if it doesn't say kills quackgrass on the label, don't use it for getting rid of quackgrass, because it's not going to work. So it should list every weed that it's effective against on the label. Follow that label. It'll give recommendations on when to apply it in terms of time of day, weather-wise. Most of them will say when the weeds are actively growing, after they have it's either rain or it's been watered, so that they're can take up that herbicide and apply at the right time. Again, seasonally, that right time doesn't do you any good to put it on the wrong time of the year if it's not going to be effective. There's a University of Minnesota Extension website highlighted there in yellow at www.extension.umn.edu/yard-and-garden. Virtually all this information I've presented here tonight is on that website. Go under lawn or lawn care or lawn weeds. That's where all those photos came from. Many more photos of weeds. I've included most of the common lawn weeds. There's other weeds, burdock and poison ivy and some of these others that you might get on your lawn or might get in that extra back part of the lot if you don't mow it on a regular basis. But I tried to cover those that were most common. So with that, we'll leave that website up there for a second. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take a look at those right now.
Yeah, Paul, there are a couple of questions that you might be able to address. One question is, have you ever heard of liquid aeration instead of using traditional core aeration? I haven't, but apparently that's something that can be done.
Oh, I have not heard that one. The recommendation is a core, takes out a plug. So it's about 3/4 of an inch diameter, punches a hole in there and then pulls that plug out, and you leave those plugs lay on the lawn. As Angie mentioned earlier, it creates little divots in that lawn so that the water and or fertilizer or herbicide can get into the soil and be effective, not run off. It's really one of the top things they recommend for lawn care is to once a year, typically in that Labor Day, early September timeframe, go out and rent an aerator or hire a contractor to aerate the lawn, because it really helps with reducing compaction, and those little divots over time will fill up with debris, grass clippings and such. So creates little sponges, if you will, to soak up water and so on.
Sure. Okay.
I've not heard of liquid.
No, I know. Well, I've been in the background Googling it and trying to learn about it because I'd never heard of it either. But
what did you find? Anything?
Well, I found a couple of different articles about it, and I'm still not entirely certain, but it seems like it's new technology, a wetting agent. A wetting agent can be made from natural materials like the yucca plant or from a more synthetic soap-like material. Anyway, yeah, I'd have to do more research about it before I could have a somewhat intelligent opinion to share on it. One that I know that you do know about, though, can you talk about grub control for Japanese beetles?
That's a really good one. So the life cycle of a Japanese beetle is about now, July 1st, the adults emerge, and those are the ones that are the problem for most of us. They attack roses, raspberries, grapes, various other flowers and vegetables. They eat the leaves, create like a lacy leaf, can destroy your roses and a lot of your flowers. So that's the main problem for most of us. In terms of a lawn, so that Japanese beetles feeds on leaves July and August timeframe. They not only feed, but they're doing that orgy thing, creating new little Japanese beetles. Then she lays her eggs in the lawn Most of us have lawn near our flower and vegetable gardens. Lays their eggs, those hatch into little grubs, which turn into big grubs, and they overwinter as a grub, a white grub, oh, I don't know, maybe about an inch long, feeding on the roots of your lawn, not in the winter, but the next spring. And unfortunately, they're, shall I use the word smart enough? They know enough to go deep enough so that a deep frost doesn't kill them, unfortunately. So then the next spring, that April, May, June timeframe, they're feeding on lawn roots. And it can be a problem for lawn. That's what our talk about here is tonight. So you can treat them. You would use some kind of an insecticide on your lawn. Would kill those grubs. The downside to that, it's not really recommended by the university because of the fact that it kills all insects in the lawn. And there's many more beneficial insects than harmful Japanese beetles. But that said, if you're looking for that perfect carpet-like golf course type lawn, you could treat those grubs with an herbicide. Diazinon comes to mind. You put that on your lawn like you would fertilizer. It soaks in and would kill those grubs. Another one we often hear about is milky spore. Again, it's somewhat effective, but it's quite expensive. Don't know a whole lot more than that about it, but that is another one that people do use. So it's a fair amount of money to treat your lawn, and if you're looking for that perfect lawn, it's well worth it. In terms of the adults and the feeding on your roses and raspberries and so on, it's best to treat those with a bucket of soapy water and knock the beetles in there, and that kills them. It's a bit time consuming. You pretty much have to do it every day. Morning or evening works best. They're cold-blooded, so they're a little bit more lethargic early in the morning or late in the evening versus middle of the day. They're pretty slow to fly away. Their natural defense is to fall to the ground. So I use a gallon milk carton with the side cut out of it and about an inch of water, a couple drops of dish detergent in there is enough to break the surface tension on their shell, and that'll kill them. The traps don't work. I mean, the traps do work, but they don't recommend them. The traps have a hormone in them and it attracts the Japanese beetles. And I kid you not, the research shows that if you put a trap in your yard, you'll catch hundreds, if not thousands of beetles, but you'll have more beetles in your yard.
You just bring more beetles to your yard.
Because all the neighborhoods fly over to your yard. So the standing joke is if you're going to spend money on a trap, put it in your neighbor's yard.
Or your enemy's yard.
That's maybe more than you wanted to hear about Japanese beetles, but it's something that's on a lot of Minnesotans' minds now. So.
Yep. My personal strategy for getting rid of Japanese beetles is to have a 9-year-old son who really enjoys picking them off of our rose bushes. And so he spends about 20 minutes a day out there just picking off the Japanese beetle and takes great pleasure in it, and that works for me.
Does he throw them in soapy water then?
No, he thinks of all sorts of creative ways to destroy them after he picks them off, like a 9-year-old boy would.
Yeah, I mean, you can squish them. It's probably better with a glove than without, or you can stomp on them, but oftentimes,
stomping,
oftentimes they're pretty quick. You have to have a hard surface to stomp on them. You can't stomp on them on the lawn.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. I'm going to go ahead and change gears a little bit, and we'll wrap up by talking about lawn alternatives. I know there was a few people who were interested in hearing about that, and here we go. Let's talk about specifically low mow. Oh, okay. I was hoping I could skip through these ones that were duplicative. Specifically talk about low mow and bee-friendly lawns. These are the two kinds that we are most often hearing people be interested in experimenting with in their homes. And just to show an example of what the low mow can look like in a real life lawn, this is a home that obviously has a beautiful view of the St. Croix River down below. They are in the Browns Creek Watershed District on the North Hill in Stillwater. And you can almost see the dividing line, can you, where the stone bench has conventional lawn underneath. And then there's almost a line where the lawn gets a little bit softer and a little bit foldier, darker green. That's where that low mow variety starts. So why go low mow? And I'll talk a bit about like what actually makes a low mow lawn. But a lot of the concerns that people have with lawns in general, and a lot of the backlash that lawns are starting to get in recent years, has to do with the amount of maintenance that is required for the conventional turf, like a Kentucky bluegrass. So needing too much water, depleting soil of nutrients, needing a lot of fossil fuels to mow it, potentially polluting surface or groundwater from using lots of chemicals. If we convert our Kentucky bluegrass lawns into low mow lawns that use fine fescues and some of these other lower maintenance, we get rid of a lot of those, so-called problems that we have with the conventional turf. Using a seed mix that meets your site conditions and proper installation gives you a drought tolerant lawn, slower growing, and just less high maintenance. So the fine fescue grasses that are recommended for Minnesota, there's 4 of them. And this matrix shows what the relative benefits and downsides of each of them are. So strong creeping red fescue, chewing fescue, I just like these names anyway, I think they're fun names, slender creeping red fescue, and sheep's fescue. So the strong creeping red fescue is not quite as good in heat or drought, and it has disease problems. So this is maybe kind of the least good one of this mix. The chewing fescue, excellent density, very aggressive, summer stress tolerance. It does have a little bit of snow mold susceptibility, and it grows more in bunches than spread out. The slender creeping red fescue has the benefit of being good salt tolerant. And then the sheep's fescue is the one that grows the slowest. So this is the one that you would have to mow the least often if you had it. So we don't really have any such thing as no mow grass. Usually, even if you're going to plant these, you will end up having to mow it once, maybe twice a year. A lot of times people like to mow them right when they go to seed because then it doesn't really look quite right anymore. And there are some qualifications. They do really well in sunny areas and low traffic areas. So that picture that is on the left on your screen shows fine fescue mix planted in 2012, no maintenance or irrigation, but it's in a nice sunny area on the university property without a lot of foot traffic. And then in contrast, on the right side, you can see what it looks like if it is in a high traffic area and dense shade. And you see it kind of ends up looking weedy and not that great. I mean, it's okay if that, if you don't mind it looking that way, but it's not going to look nice. And I can attest to that. I tried it out as an experiment in my own backyard, and we're pretty shady. And like I said, we have a 9-year-old boy and we have a dog, and ours kind of looks like example number 2, the one that is a little bit patchy and a little bit weedy. But in terms of drought tolerance, the fescues are really well do really well in these drought tests that they do at the university. So we're looking at hard fescue and fine fescue after a drought test. And I think I have a better, let me go. Here we go. Here's a better picture where it's got, a side-by-side comparison. So the one that is on the right is a fine fescue mix that got mowed twice a year, no herbicide, approximately 3 inches tall, had almost no weeds, ends up looking, really nice. But I was mentioning earlier that they do go to seed eventually. And so you can see, especially with the hard fescue, once it goes to seed, it doesn't really look like a lawn anymore. So most people like to mow it right around the time that it's starting to go to seed, just so that it looks more like a lawn again. So there are a few different places that you can go to buy a low mow lawn seed. Prairie Nursery in central Wisconsin is one place where they have been specializing in this for over a decade. So if you go online to their website, they have no mow, low mow mixes, and they have a lot of really good information about how to install them. But you can also go locally to a number of different places and be able to buy it. Don't purchase anything that's got a Kentucky bluegrass in it, because that's really going to end up being your biggest competitor, your biggest weed with these low mow varieties. And there is a window of opportunity coming up around the end of August, early September. If you are, kind of starting from scratch, establishing a new low mow lawn, that is, one little window of opportunity where you can do that. They don't really do as well if you try to establish them in the spring. But the biggest challenge is if you're going to do that, generally you're going to have to get rid of whatever it is that you have first. And, that's either going to mean putting down an herbicide to kill off your existing lawn, using some kind of solarization, which is a organic option, but will take you an entire growing season. Or if you are really impatient like me, I usually end up going to the rental store and renting a sod cutter, which gives you instant gratification, but you get really muddy and really sweaty and really tired. So in terms of installation, like I said, Kentucky bluegrass ends up being the biggest competitor and what you need to get rid of if you want to have a successful low mow lawn. Lightly rake or aerate the lawn, broadcast seed, ideal time, late September to October. I've heard people say, or, late August is okay as well. And using a germination blanket to keep the seeds moist until they sprout can help as well. You're going to want to lightly water just until it germinates. And then once the grass is coming up, then stop watering so that it can, establish its roots and get down in there. Just an example of what some other low growing options look like. Non-traditional turf grass species, buffalo grass, blue grama, Texas bluegrass, tufted hairgrass, prairie June grass. This shows having no mow on a sunnier northern side, and then path rush is along this, path rush is this kind of thing, if you could see where my cursor is, in the back, and it ends up growing more like in a bunch. So it works well if you just want a ground cover, but it doesn't end up looking like a lawn. So the other one that I wanted to talk about a little bit is bee lawn. And this is for folks, I was laughing when Paul was talking about how to get rid of the clover. If you want to put the clover back in again, which a lot of people are starting to say, hey, I would like to put some clover back in again. I would like to provide some habitat for some nectar for bees and other pollinator species. You would still want to start with a base of having that fine fescue. But the three main species that people are most commonly using in these bee-friendly lawns is a self-heal, a creeping thyme, and a Dutch white clover. However, none of the three of these are native to Minnesota. So we also recommend that you could consider a ground plum, a lance-leaf coreopsis, or a calico aster as three native varieties that could be put into a lawn if you are open to the idea of having a flowering lawn that gets some bees on it. So basically, if you are just taking a traditional lawn and you want to turn it into a bee lawn, you don't need to start completely from scratch like you would with a low mow. You don't need to completely remove your existing grass. You can scalp the lawn, meaning put your blade really low, scalp it to be 1/2 inch to 1 inch tall, rough up the soil with a rake, and then seed right into that. Put down a little bit of fertilizer. You could use some compost as a top dressing, water daily until it germinates, and then you are going to be able to continue mowing it because these plants will learn basically how to flower at a lower level. So whereas an aster might grow tall, if you continually mow it, it will start flowering at a short level. So you can cut them to be 3 or 4 inches tall. Just one other thing for anybody who has shade in their yards, there are some other options of low growing things that grow in shady areas. Most of those, the low mow lawn and the bee friendly lawn are better suited for sun, and they're also better suited for low traffic areas. But shady ground covers like moss, wild strawberry, the wine leaf, cinquefoil, violets, wild ginger, those are all great things if you just have a shady area and you want to have something that's going to grow there. Okay, so I'm going to just share a whole bunch of resources with you rapid fire. And I will send all of these resources out by email tomorrow so that you can click on these links to be able to go through the things on your own. As Paul said earlier, Minnesota Extension has a whole network of information all about lawns. So that's a great resource to go to. We have something called the Blue Thumb Guide to Year-Round Yard Care. And if you want, you can, if you want to have like a paper copy, go ahead and respond to my email and ask me for one and I'll mail one to you. We have information about how to do a bee lawn, information about how to do a low-mow lawn. We even have this really nice little handout. I'm just gonna pause my share to show you what it looks like, called What to Ask For from Your Lawn Care Provider. We have this in both English and Spanish. And this was designed with the thought in mind that a lot of people are hiring a lawn care provider and then the company is coming and saying, well, you know, for the silver package, you should do this. And for the gold package, you should do this. This is a nice tool for you to be able to hand to them and say, hey, this is what I want. I just want a reasonable amount of fertilizer, a reasonable amount of weed control. I don't want to have your platinum package that you're trying to sell to me. So that's just to, get you equipped. Let me keep on clicking through here. Lost my mouse. Where'd you go, mouse? Okay. From the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization, they have some nice little short videos, cover a lot of the similar information that Paul talked about today. We also have these even shorter videos. These are just little 2-minute snippets. So these ones are great ones for sharing with friends or on Facebook or in an email. And then finally, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the Washington Conservation District also offers assistance for people to do some of these larger projects, like converting a conventional lawn into low mow or bee friendly lawn, or planting a rain garden, starting a native garden, something like that. So the office does offer free site visits. The Blue Thumb Planting for Clean Water program has a ton of resources, and we also have a lot of resources on the Conservation District under the Planting for Clean Water page, and a whole bunch of resources about lawn care as well. And then finally, I've got contact information for all of us. So, are there any other questions that Paul and I may have elicited while we were finishing up that presentation? All right. Well, my interest or my curiosity has been piqued about the liquid aeration now. Now I want to know more about it. So I'm going to have to learn about that myself. Okay. Well, are there any other events planned through the Browns Creek CAC Open Yard Series, Cameron, that we want to mention while folks are here?
We have a lot of Woodbury folks.
I know. I know all you Woodburyans.
Yeah, some of our upcoming events are very in Browns Creek. So I'm not sure if you're interested in buckthorn removal, we'll be doing some of that this fall. And then we're having our annual community event in September. If you want to come visit a different place and see Browns Creek, it's a great resource.
Yeah. I am just looking up the date of our Watershed pop-up event in Woodbury. Tuesday, August 10th, I'm going to be down at Edgewater Park, which is the one on the south side of Colby Lake, from 4 till 6:30. This is a fun one if you've got kids or grandkids that you want to bring them by. We're just going to be mucking around in the lake and looking for aquatic macroinvertebrates and tadpoles and frogs and things like that. So if you want to stop by, that's Tuesday, August 10th. And like I said, I'll send out an email tomorrow morning, so you should have all these resources at your fingertips. And I think other than that, we can just bid you adieu, right?
Thanks, everyone.
All righty. Good night, everyone.
Bye now. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.